So I'm Andy Hooton, and I'm the Head of Sport and Exercise Science at the University of Derby. And I'm going to talk to you tonight about shape your own environment. I've been a practicing sport and exercise psychologist for just over 10 years now. And I absolutely love my profession, absolutely love working with people and supporting people. And one thing that I've noticed with athletes is they're very, very influenced by their environments that they interact with. And that's what I want you to think about tonight, interactive environments. And those are environments with other people in it, okay? So when I'm talking tonight, think about your own interactive environments. It can be sporting and exercise-based environments. It can be work environments. It can be social environments. It can be family environments. But I want you to think about those and think whether there's anything that you could relate to in relation to this. And when I've been working with these athletes, I've noticed how they will change based on the environment they are in and how that impacts their experience, how that impacts their enjoyment, how it impacts their happiness, their well-being, and also their performance outcomes. And then I started thinking, in terms of sports psychology, can we use it within different spheres of life? Why does it just have to be sport and physical activity that we use it in? Can we use it in business? Can we use it in everyday life? So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to give you an example in sport, an example in just generic performance, and an example in everyday life. And hopefully we will be able to see how they map across. And all of the examples that I'm going to give, I'm going to talk about tools and techniques that we use in sport and exercise psychology to enhance those experiences of athletes. Now, I teach a lot of practitioner development at the university, so working with students who are aspiring psychologists, physiologists, biomechanists, coaches, and they want to go and work with athletes. And I'm very encouraging of them to be more authentic, grow themselves as individuals, because they're also in a performance environment. And I ask them, what's your greatest fear? What's your greatest anxiety? And we try and really lower the barriers, lower the impression management so that we get them to kind of really open up. And I was absolutely blown away recently by what they had to share with me in terms of what they're carrying on their shoulders in terms of the weight of just everyday life. Some of them have some real challenges that they're carrying into these different environments, so much so that it stops them actually participating within a classroom environment, which is really tough to then think, how are you going to go out and deliver within a sporting environment and enter the lion's den of like an under-18 football academy or something like that. So maybe all of you here, I would hazard a guess, have got something that you're carrying, some challenge in your life at the moment. And it's really interesting to think about how we take those issues and those challenges into these different interactional environments and how we still manage ourselves. One of the speakers tonight told me that they were in desperate need of a break, yet they've still smashed it out the park tonight and they've put on a great show. So we definitely kind of have a way of coping and a way of getting through these things. So I'd like to introduce you to a couple of people that I've worked with. And I'd first like to thank them for the ability that they've said that they're happy for me to share their stories, because it's one thing sharing it with me and asking for a bit of help and a bit of support. It's another thing feeling comfortable to say, yeah, I'm happy for you to share it with everybody else as well. So I'd like to firstly thank them for kind of permitting me to do that. So you can have the first one. I'd like you to introduce you to Emma. So Emma is a track cyclist. Emma does track cycling for enjoyment. She does it for social purposes. And she also does it for performance improvement. Now, when I met Emma, she'd had a really bad accident on the track. She'd broken her collarbone. And essentially, she was really struggling to get back into her hobby, her sport, what her passion was. And we had a first meeting. She was quite emotional within that first meeting. And she told me that every time she was pulling up to the velodrome, she would refer to it as the big yellow box of doom. And I was thinking, wow, like I've come across some people who fear their work environment and maybe struggle to get out of the car when they get to work. But having that fear when you get to your hobby and your sport, that's a really kind of challenging place to be in, because that's meant to be our release, that's meant to be our downtime or enjoyable time. So what I want you to think about when we're working with Emma is refocusing and thought changing. So we talked about what she's struggling with, and Emma was incredibly externally focused. So essentially, all she's concerned about when she's on the track is what is everybody else doing on the track? Are they going to endanger me? Are they going to lead me into another accident? Are they going to lead me into another injury? And that is not a very effective way to provide enjoyment for yourself. So if we imagine a scale where we've got an external focus and an internal focus, then essentially I don't want her to flip from all this external focus right the way over to internal focus, because I think there's a need to recognize that we need an element of health and safety when we're on the track, and we need that spatial awareness. But essentially, I do want her to move along the spectrum, because while she's completely externally focused, she's not deriving any personal enjoyment from that experience. So essentially, what we got her to do was talk through some of the things that she was thinking about. And this is the thought changing kind of aspect that I want to talk through. Now, thought changing is tricky. It takes practice. You know, when people want to go and get fit or lose weight, it takes time. And people often think that the mind is a different thing that you can just flip a switch and change. And it's not. It takes work. It takes persistence. So thought changing is one of those mechanisms whereby we can identify irrelevant, uncontrollable, and negative thoughts and potentially think about how we can start to minimize their appearance. Now, we can't eradicate them. We all get those negative thoughts. We've heard that tonight. But essentially what we can do is start to minimize them. So what we did was we identified those. So as I've listed before, some of those for Emma would have been, what's everybody else doing on the track? Where am I on the track? You know, what is the coach going to throw at me tonight? Are there going to be new drills? Because am I going to be comfortable with those drills? Do I trust that everybody else is going to be able to execute those drills effectively, or are they going to be endangering me? And then what we did was we introduced a thought-stopping cue. So for Emma, this was a red light, okay? It means stop, doesn't it? It means stop to everybody, a big red light. And essentially, she would image that. Now, every time this thought comes into her mind, a negative, uncontrollable, challenging thought, she would use the red light. Now, that could be when she pulls up in the car park. That could be away from the velodrome. That could be during the session. Use the red light, and then what we do is we try and reframe our thoughts to something positive, adaptive, and something that is relevant to what we're doing. So for Emma, we took two channels on that. One was to try and create more enjoyment about what she was doing and focus herself in on her own performance. So that was, essentially, she was very tense on the bike. That was to try and relax and try and essentially rest hands. So rather than gripping the handlebars, rest hands. She was able to focus on the line, so the red or the blue line or the black line, essentially, that you're utilizing on the track. Focus on the line, and then also just the ability to be able to kind of think about her technique. So the push and pull of the revolution of the cycling. Okay, so that's just trying to bring her a bit in internally. Now, we still maintained an element of the external, and what we had there was the notion of look before you move. So on the track, if you've ever seen them whizzing around in the Olympics, you'll notice that in a team event, they'll pull out, they'll swing out, and they'll on the bend, and they'll come in at the back, and they'll join the rest of the team. So look before you move was still maintaining that peripheral vision and that awareness, because that's important, and it maintains our health and safety, and it doesn't move us all the way along the spectrum. And the other thing that we did was we started to provide a bit of challenge to Emma. So one of the things that she was starting to do was anytime a new drill was introduced, she was just coming off the track because she wasn't comfortable with it in herself, and she wasn't uncomfortable with what everybody else was doing. And we just kind of got a coach involved and also encouraged her, just try and do half the drill. Try and do 3/4 of the drill. Try and do the whole drill. Try and do two new drills in a row. And actually, after a while, we're able to build up her confidence, and she's able to kind of address any challenges and new kind of environments as she goes. And what we see, hopefully now, is a more relaxed individual that's enjoying her time, that's enjoying her hobby again, that she's gaining that experience out of it, and she's gaining those performance improvements out of it. So that's been really positive, and I've been really pleased to stay in touch with Emma over the last few years. She's managed it really well through lockdown when she wasn't able to access the track, and she's still going strong now, and that's worked really well for her. So next, I'd like to move away from sport and introduce you to a young man called Tom. So Tom is a percussionist, and if we take it back to sport, Tom's like a heptathlete or a decathlete within sport. Essentially, he's a master of a number of different instruments. Tom trains in Amsterdam, okay? And Tom came with challenges associated with nerves and anxiety with two different areas. So one was assessment at university, and the other was auditions. So auditions where he's looking for professional contracts and jobs, okay? So Tom had tried a raft of different things before we met. So he'd tried a calm music playlist to try and relax him before he went in to perform. He'd tried an upbeat music playlist to get himself psyched and get himself ready. He'd tried wearing different styles of clothes to be relaxed when he went in to play. He'd even considered trying a tipple, much like myself tonight, before I came in. And He didn't do that, by the way, but he considered it. And he couldn't solve the root cause. So what Tom did was he tried to address the problem. Now, the problem was an element of shaking hands, and I'm quite accurately representing that right now. Okay, so shaking hands. And what Tom did, I mean, shaking hands is not an ideal scenario for a percussionist who needs to be really kind of dexterous in terms of their performance. So what Tom did was he tensed his arms, okay? So he tensed his arms, and that would stop the shaking, and it would reduce or minimize the shaking. And essentially, I asked Tom, what does that mean in terms of your level of performance? Like, how much, you must be knocking some performance kind of potential off you there. And obviously this is subjective and Tom's opinion, but he reckons he's knocking about 20% of his performance potential off himself when he tenses his arms. But it gets him through the performance and it gets him through the auditions. Now, we tried some of the same thought-changing mechanisms with Tom that we tried with Emma, and they had a partially positive effect. But they didn't work every time, and they weren't long-lasting. And this is what I love about sports psychology, because what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another person. And we always have to work with the individual and team that we're working with to find out what works for them. And generally, I like for them to come up with the solution so that I'm not a crutch. They're able to kind of solve problems on their own moving forwards. So I've got a good example of how Tom then managed to move forward with this. Tom lives in Amsterdam. He went to one audition in Luxembourg and he went to one audition in Belgium. So he's traveling a pretty long distance and there's pretty high pressure associated with these auditions. Essentially, he was left a lot to his own devices within the environment, the waiting room before his audition. And what that did for Tom is it allowed him to be very externally focused, similar to Emmett, but this time he was looking at everyone else and thinking, wow, I wonder what they're going to do. What have I got to offer that they're not going to offer? And what Tom's doing in that scenario is he's heightening his anxiety and he's heightening his nerves, okay? Now, he didn't perform well in that audition. He didn't get the job. Then he went to Belgium. Now, he went to Belgium with some colleagues and some friends off his course. What that did was provided a social network for Tom at the venue, in the preparation room. It allowed him to have a laugh, to be more Tom, to just relax and be authentic to himself. And then Tom did something off his own bat that we hadn't even talked about. Before his actual performance, he walked around the preparation room and imagined himself as a gorilla. Now, I don't think that he was beating the chest and going around like that, but essentially he wanted to think of something that was dominant, that was confident, that he could take into a performance environment. And I don't think that Tom's even going to use this consistently moving forward. But what it did in terms of those two things, we had a social aspect and obviously the imagery aspect, is it created a more authentic version of Tom. It created the Tom that I see within our consultancy. He's a very confident young man. What it did is it brought out the individual that I see when we're consulting in that performance environment. And that's a really key thing. And I also invite you guys to think yourself about, are you authentic within your roles or are you the role? You know, how many people become the role rather than themselves within the role? And I think that's a really interesting concept to think about. And I always encourage the practitioners that I work with, that I try to develop, to be yourself, because people buy into you as an individual. And that's the most important thing to get any kind of results out of people. So the last bit is offering you a little bit of me. So now we move to just real life scenario. So we've done sport, we've done performance in terms of musical performance, and now we're going to real life. And I am very fortunate, I'm very blessed. I have a gorgeous wife and two beautiful children. Now I've got a daughter of 2 and a son, a tinkering son that I was talking about earlier. He's 10 months, who keeps us up most nights, and I'm normally in bed by this time, so this is proving challenging. But that has provided its challenges. And the thing that I want to think about is, I talked about interactional environments at the start. And the thing that I've noticed with interactional environments is that they have knock-on effects to each other. And it's often the case that that happens. So our work environment impacts our home environment and vice versa. Okay, our social environment impacts our work and home environment. You know, they have knock-on effects to each other. And that's an important thing to consider. Because for me, one of the transitions has been, how do I improve my performance? And I don't mean like get better at work. I mean get more effective and more efficient at work. Okay, so with that, I'm talking about organization and I'm talking about prioritization. And you might think that we've moved away from sports psychology now, but we really haven't. Because when I work with athletes, I don't just work with the athlete, I work with the person. And in order to bring out the best in the athlete, I have to be able to understand the person. And we look at all of their life and all of their interactional environments to be able to understand how we can better advance some aspects of those to be able to bring out the real individual, the authentic individual when it comes to that performance environment. So for me, what I've done is I've planned my weeks ahead. I never used to do that. I just used to go into weeks, not blind, but felt like blind, and I'd just be going from, like, bouncing from meeting to meeting. And now I plan my weeks ahead. So I make sure I've got the meetings that I need associated with what I need to be doing, and I make sure I've got a period of time for projects that I need to be delivering on, and I also make sure I've got a period of time for anything that crops up in the week, because that is becoming increasingly common within most work situations. I've also got better at prioritizing. Okay, so essentially what I mean by that is I'm prioritizing things that I know I need to achieve to get the results that I want at work. Now, with prioritizing that, it enables me to, on occasion, say no to things which in the past I would never have done. I'm a yes man, I'm a pleaser, I'm a helper, I want to develop people, I want to help people, and I really struggle to say no. But I've had to adopt that approach in order to be able to make sure that I'm facilitating what I call my A game. My A game is my family, that's life. You know, I say to my team that I work with at the university, we always prioritize our A game. This is the B game which facilitates that. Now, it's not that it's maybe unimportant. I'm not trying to do that. What I'm trying to say is we need to recognize that we're prioritizing that, because prioritizing that gets the best out of us within our work and performance environment. And that's the same within a sport psychology setting. It's the same within a performance environment. So I guess there's a few things to think about from what we've covered in terms of those examples. One was, I guess, from Emma in terms of the refocusing and the thought-changing protocols. Then we've got the greater enjoyment and authenticity associated with Tom. And finally, the organization and prioritization that we can take into everyday life. And I believe that all those 6 aspects can be utilized within different interactional environments for us to get better enjoyment, enhance our well-being, enhance our experience, and where relevant, enhance our performance outcomes. So I'd like you to think about your interactional environments and where you might be able to utilize those. And thank you very much for tonight. I hope you all have a good evening.